ABC Studios in New York. This is the special report, the presidential election of 1920. Starring Chuck Nolan, statistics expert George Stephanopoulos, and special guest Wolfgang Puck, with a special post-election interview with P.P. Christensen of the Farmer Labor Party. And now, ABC's #1 news team with the front line. Here's Chuck Nolan.
Good afternoon, welcome to the front line this afternoon. We have just finished up and completed the election of 1920 for the 29th President of the United States. The winner from the Republican Party is Warren Gamaliel Harding, and underneath him, Vice President-elect Calvin Coolidge. Nobody really expected him to win this presidency, as no one even expected him to win the Republican nomination in this whole election. The runner-up, James N. Cox, for the Democratic Party, fell well short of winning this election. The electoral count was 404 for Harding to 127 for Cox, which totals out to a difference of... Let's take it over to George Stephanopoulos with some statistics. George!
The difference is 277.
Alright, thank you, George. As for the popular vote, we're going to bring that up right away. It was also staggering. Warren G. Harding coming with a 60.4% of the popular vote total. Also, James N. Cox falling well short of that, with only 34.2% of the popular vote. And then, of course, Eugene V. Debs from the Socialist Party and P.P. Christensen from the Farmer Labor Party falling even further short, with 3.4% and 1% of the popular vote total, and getting no electoral votes between the two. As for Cox, it didn't pay off that he traveled 22,000 miles and making over 400 speeches to try to sell his candidacy. Obviously, only winning 11 southern states, trying to base his candidacy off of the solid South, as Harding won 37 states. And it was a pretty much landslide victory for Harding here in the 1920 presidential election. Presidential candidates that are not listed up there are, like, let's say, Franklin Delano Roosevelt from New York. I mean, this guy, second on the ballot for the Democratic Party, you know, great, who cares, you know? I can see him running for president in a few years, like, let's say, the 32nd president of the United States. Yeah, right, okay? The Republican Party of Harding and Coolidge ran on the opposition of the Wilson administration for its handling of World War I, also opposed the League of Nations, and on trade and immigration, Harding and Coolidge advocate a higher protective tariff and also support new immigration requirements. Overall, they promised to return to a more normal state, which is interesting too, because he said that he wanted a return to normalcy. And normalcy is defined as George Stephanopoulos.
Normalcy, which is defined as normality, which is a state or fact of being normal.
Thank you, George. Al Jolson, a very popular entertainer, actually compared Harding to very famous President Abraham Lincoln, which is pretty surprising since you would compare him to such a great president in our nation's history. In the Foreign Affairs category, Harding will appoint Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes, and also Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, and Secretary of Treasury Andrew Mellon, and together they will design a foreign policy that will enable the U.S. to participate in the world's economic life while retaining a free hand in international relations. And also they wanted to clean up in World War I. As for reparations, Germany was pretty much the biggest country that was down in the dumps in terms of cash and reparations. So what they did was they negotiated the Dawes Plan, which pretty much scaled down Germany's payments to 2.5 billion marks over the next 50 years. They were fueled by a massive injection of American loans, $2 billion over the next 5 years, that were used to pay their reparations, and the Europeans in turn used part of the reparation system to fund debts, and drastically they were reduced by the Dawes Plan. Also coming out of the Foreign Affairs category, was very high situation on Mellon's and Hughes' agenda. It was, of course, the arms race that pretty much spun out of control in prior to 1914. And what they wanted to do was organize the Washington Armament Conference. And it was a conference brought together that pretty much evened out everyone's navy. The countries that were involved in this conference: Great Britain, Japan, China, and also Italy and France. A 9-power treaty emerged out of the conference in which all of the signature states with interest in the Far East guaranteed the territorial integrity of China and an open door to trade and investment there. And that was pretty much the basis of the Washington Armament Conference, in which was organized by Mellon and Hughes of the cabinet of Warren G. Harding. We move on! As for family life, Warren G. Harding didn't have any children with his wife Florence Harding. Florence had a son by prior marriage, but they really didn't have enough social acquaintance to have any children, so their social affairs were limited to elegant garden parties and typical affairs of state. They loved to entertain special friends, especially in the upstairs quarters of the White House, where they served them liquor, which they obtained as medical supplies, in private defiance of prohibition. For Harding, social life revolved around pretty much twice-weekly poker games with his cronies, golf games at the Chevy Chase Country Club, yachting, and fishing. He was the first president ever to have a radio in the White House and the first president to broadcast a presidential message by using the radio. As the 29th president of the United States, Harding ensured a new era of prosperity after a very staggering recession took place after World War I. The gross national product increased by 16% between 1921 and 1922, and by 1923, unemployment dropped to a low of 2%, which is pretty incredible. Also, most workers in the manufacturing area were fully employed and had an average of about $22 per week, which was an all-time high. Thank you for watching this week's episode of The Front Line. For George Stephanopoulos, my statistics expert, thank you also to special guest Wolfgang Puck. I'm Chuck Nolan. Good night.
The Front Line by ABC News has been brought to you by BBC Productions, copyrighted 2005.